Hello, my name is John Sherrill, and I am currently in Lafayette, Indiana at Purdue University. Um, my apologies for not being there in person. I had some issues with my flight being canceled, um, but hopefully I'll be able to Skype in for the Q&A afterwards. The title of my talk today is Do I Really Need Safety Glasses for This Class? Um, and in this presentation, I will discuss how students respond to designing and 3D printing objects in a first-year writing course. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. So despite initial reactions of confusion or disgust from students, by the end of 16 weeks, the assignments I'm going to describe help students develop rhetorical skills to produce effective writing. These assignments succeed in part as a diversionary tactic from the large amounts of writing that students do in the class. That is, students realize in retrospect how much writing they've actually done in the process of 3D printing, writing instructions, and also learning about design. So what begins as a sense of wonder in the form of why are we doing this in a writing class eventually moves towards how do we apply what we've learned to the workplace. To explain this learning process, I will first describe David Sheridan's theoretical framework for using 3D printing in the composition classroom. I'll then describe the assignment sequence of my first-year composition course to explain the writing that students do in relation to other aspects of the class. From there, I will discuss student reactions and responses to the assignments, affordances and limitations of the course, and will conclude with what these experiences can tell us about the continued importance of rhetoric to teaching with new digital technologies and contexts. In his 2010 Computers and Composition article, Fabricating Consent, Three-Dimensional Objects as Rhetorical Compositions, David Sheridan provides 4 arguments for using 3D printing in the composition classroom. In this article, Sheridan applies earlier arguments for teaching visual rhetoric to 3D modeling and digital fabrication. More specifically, Sheridan identifies at least 4 kinds of arguments made for new rhetorical modes. That is, arguments from infrastructural accessibility, i.e., because it's possible, from rhetorical effectiveness, because it's powerful, from cultural status, because it's valued, and finally, from despecialization, or because it's ours. To support these arguments, Sheridan cites 3 cases in which principles of rhetoric and composition are successfully applied to media outside plaintext on a page. In essence, Sheridan argues that the purpose of the composition classroom is to teach students how to use rhetoric effectively and to compose as a broader cycle of production, reproduction, distribution, and consumption. As he states, citing Bruce McConsky, "My job is to teach rhetoric in all its forms, and 3D compositions are compelling rhetorical forms." More recent examples, such as Harlot of the Arts' 14th issue on craft rhetorics, as well as the merging of the so-called maker movement with higher education in K-12 classrooms, all suggest that Sheridan's argument is powerful and still timely. Following Sheridan's call to place a 3D printer in the hands of composition students and teachers, I designed a first-year composition course in which students first perform a rhetorical analysis of a digital artifact. Then they model and print an object that makes an argument in response to a social issue. That is, they're responding to a rhetorical situation. And finally, students document their design processes for a public audience via Instructables.com, a popular website for sharing DIY instructions. Unsurprisingly, students often ask, why are we doing this in a writing class? So why are my students designing objects in the writing class? Well, in part for the reason Sheridan argues, or the reasons, and in part to strategically distract from the volume of writing students actually do. In addition to designing objects, students write a design plan, conduct user interviews, write progress reports, write usability evaluation materials and reports, write reflections that analyze their rhetorical choices, write a distribution plan, draft instructions, write another reflection, and create relevant metadata, all while creating or writing approximately 16 pages of reading responses throughout the semester. So in other words, students are writing throughout the course, but they rarely question the usefulness of the supplementary writing to their projects in the ways that they question the usefulness of 3D printing. As students don't always make connections between 3D printing and writing, but they do usually build connections with rhetoric. Students often initially react skeptically when I tell them we'll be 3D printing. For example, one of the first questions of the semester is always, do we really need safety glasses? Yes, you do, so that I can continue to say that no one has injured themselves in my class. Once we move into talking about the 3D printing assignment, though, students often ask me, how does this help me become a better writer? Or in their reading responses, they write, this 3D printing stuff is interesting, but I'm not sure how this fits with writing yet. But I can kind of see how objects could make an argument. So part of how I help students make these connections is through Collaborative Wiki, which is really a class-wide annotated bibliography in Google Docs, but it works. Each week, students post a resource to the wiki along with a 3 to 4 sentence summary. Then we talk about what they posted. This wiki helps students explore connections between the material we cover in class, that is rhetoric, writing, and 3D printing, and students' own interests. And I'm happy to talk more about the structure of that in the time after. Once the semester finishes and students have opportunities to reflect on both the 3D design and documentation projects, they consistently express a few things they've learned. Most often, students tell me and demonstrate that they have a better understanding of audience and rhetorical goals, particularly through developing usability evaluation materials and writing instructions for an outside audience. Students can measure this through view counts and comments, as well as by talking with users on Instructables.com. Furthermore, students frequently say that they developed a sense of how understanding their audience can shape design choices across media and rhetorical situations, so not just in writing, not just in 3D design. That is, they develop skills that are not limited to writing plain text documents. To this end, 3D printing works to teach rhetoric as well as writing. But this is not to say that 3D printing is just a shiny distraction. Many students enjoy the practical skills, as they put it, that documentation teaches them. Students can see clearer applications for documentation and technical communication skills in their future work, though they seem less aware of how the planning process might also help them in the future. Of course, not all students are happy about 3D printing in a composition course. Students who enter the class expecting to write multiple 8 to 10 page research papers with the hope of improving their writing style are often disappointed. They're usually vocal about their frustrations as well, despite spending an entire week on editing and style for the first rhetorical analysis assignment. Unfortunately, despite my offers to discuss the class and students' goals, when students feel the class is not serving them, there have been a few students who finished the course frustrated. But as a result of 16 weeks of practice, some students create really amazing projects like the one on screen now. Some students will never use 3D printing again, regardless of whether they enjoyed the course, and that's okay. Some will never recognize the pages upon pages of writing they produced, despite my encouraging them to count, often because they were focused on conceptualizing 3D printing as writing rather than as a complementary medium. But students will inevitably use rhetoric to help them make decisions and communicate more effectively, which they practice through 3D printing. They will still practice writing long after these classes end, and will encounter new and sometimes uncomfortable contexts, technologies, and theories to which rhetoric still applies. And part of what this class is designed to do is to help them navigate that successfully. Thank you. I encourage you all to check out some of my students' projects on Instructables. I have several collections as well as my own work, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.